Hello, my name is Mónica Domínguez Estrada. I'm studying the third quarter of the master's degree in English language teaching at EXPRO University. I am coursing the subject Teaching English through Translation, and I am presenting a job titulated Translating as a Language Teaching Tool, directed by the teacher Jesús Adrián Castañón Aquino. I am from Tequisquiac, Estado de México. In this work, I will be talking about some aspects related to translations, history, methods, advantages of using it, among other implications. The first aspect I am going to consider is the history of translation. The history of translation began a long time ago, since with cultures have tried to communicate each other, trespassing language barriers. Some beginners of the translation were Egyptians. Their first objective of cultures had was to expand their territory and predominate in wider areas, so they started to translate words to stay in contact to them. Another cultures used varieties of their own languages to distinguish social classes. For example, Egyptians used the language for slaves and God's language, but as a necessity to keep them under their commands. They had to use the slaves' language to keep them dominated. Later, when some cultures tried to expand their religious beliefs, they used translation to talk other cultures about their beliefs. So they had to learn words of their languages to try to adapt their words of their languages to theirs. But what is translation? Translation, it is not a method. It is a tool used to transfer text from one language to other. It implies some aspects. Translating is how a text is taken from a source language to target language. Many factors must be taken in account. The process of translation implies or determines how to transfer the contents of source language into the target language. First, we are going to analyze the practical approach. The practical approach considers some factors that help a professional translator to move from one source to another. For example, one of the aspects that we have to consider are the communicative function, the target language, textual style, potential audience, and requirements of host culture and linguistic system. Some models for translating that we are going to consider are the linguistic model. Linguistic model studies linguistic resources of source and target languages. Another model for translating is the text linguistic model. It takes into account uses of language by speakers and writers in communicative situations and the use of conventions. Another model is the sociocultural translation. Translation should be always read like translations. So, translators should not use invisible, and readers should be allowed to appreciate the source of culture. Another model for translating is the computational. The computational is exactly the machine translation that would take over the job of all except literary translating. It is very common used actually, but the problem with machines is that they cannot take into account context elements, so translators have to be checked and post-editing to improve the machine translation. Another model is the psycholinguistic. This considers the protocol TAP uh, suggested by Lesher in 1991. It includes three processes, that is, understanding, transcending, and formulating, but it has no ground in natural translators' behavior. Finally, the interdisciplinary models that I will be analyzing in the next slide, and it refers to remove the idea that first language and second language are equivalent because of lexical grammatical complexes. It is a little difficult to translate word by word and try to translate a text like that. We have to adapt some words or look for some synonyms to the text. Ends with all the comprehension needed by the user. Lexical resources are used when grammar fails. As a linguistic system, pragmatic constraints, word knowledge, and meaning system all converge in the act of translation. According Vasquez Ayora list of strategies, there are some things that we have to take in account when translating. That is the transposition, the amplification, the equivalence, the adaptation, modulation, explicitation, omission, and compensation. The translators are limited to a source text. They draw on their fluency in target language to create a target text. Translation critics establish how trade-off is adequate and appropriate. The critical approach presupposes a finished translation. This method considers the literary criticism that focuses on literary or textual qualities of a work as it exists in translation. The frames, according to Newbert in 1992, are defined in terms of how a language user interprets his environment, formulates his own message, and understands and accumulates or creates an internal model of his work. It is like giving interpretation of a text. Some words maybe aren't exactly as the source text, but in the target text, the translator adapts according to his or her perception about the culture or environment for the people who are they working. Translation is judged on its own merits of a third language. Now, the translation theory today, according House in 1981, it is related to translation criticism. It compares second language and third language versions, finding mistakes and contrasting interdisciplinary approach, the existence of overt and covert translation, cultural approaches, intercultural communication, values, and pragmatics. Covert translation refers when translation is not marked as a translated text of a source text, and overt translation takes in account different cultural presuppositions in two language communities. So, they consider the context. Another important aspect are the cultural conventions. They are extremely relevant for literary translations because the context is taken in account to adapt the source text according to the public or the audience that are going to read the information. The pragmatics It's another element considered in the translation. In translation, the presupposition and inference play a great role in retrieving utterance meaning. Not only is encoded in language. The more scientifically oriented a text is, the more value-free is. Literary and specialized texts are different in content and form. To translate, consider metonymy and metaphor, verbal equation, reader, focus of content, not in appearance. So it is important when a translator works that thinks about the audience and the cultures they have to find the equivalence of verbs and words that he or she has to use when working on the target text. Translators' competence then have to, to use language systems competence, but also communicative knowledge. Skills have to be learned and also dominate two cultural systems, so it becomes a complex task because besides the work on the two languages or be competent on the two languages skills, they have to manage also the cultural systems to be able to adapt the target texts. Skills and requirements to translate. What do a translator needs to develop the task? Proficiency in foreign language. Another is excellent command of translator's mother tongue. Interpretation skills already acquired before entering to the study of translations. Another things that he needs is mental effort, linguistic skills, close knowledge of subject matter of the source text, mastery target language, and analysis and examination of its contents. Teaching translation implies several issues. The first one has become popular in Europe and other parts of the world. A model of translating and interpreting literary translation has increased to improve in this area. So some schools have started teaching this in this area or preparing professionals for this area. But what do teaching future professionals or what do they need? First of all, they need a translation and interpretation degree, including masters, are present in education in the field in the universities. The objective of this career is to develop the use of language as a tool in a future professional activity. The professional translators focus on practical aspects of total proficiency in source and target language with techniques used in translation. But some factors are implied when translators. The first one is rhythm, diction, and movement. Another factor is socio-cultural knowledge. This is one of the most important issues. Ability to use collocations, vocabulary, punctuation, spelling, among other aspects. Some keywords have to be adapted, changed, or replaced to adjust communication in the target text. Some difficulties that are found when translating are the lack of proficiency in the target language. Another is the lack of proficiency in source language. And finally, the lack of intercultural competence or sensitivity. So it is very important to develop in these three skills to be a successful translation. Actually, translation as a language teaching tool has some advantages in our students when we are working in the classroom. The first one is improve awareness of differences existing between first language and second language in content and form. Another advantage is that contributes to check on accuracy. Another is cognitive and psychological reasons, because our learners many times translate in an unconscious way. The recent approaches to translating the classroom are that translation is a potential tool for language learning. Students can think that they understand. They pay attention to coherence and cohesion of the text in the target language. And translation also invites to speculation and discussion. Reading and translating develops clarity, flexibility, and accuracy. Steps to translation. We have some steps to translation. Preparatory exercises. These are some tools that we have to use in the classroom when working on teams, for example, writing and reading tests. So our learners have to prepare or to adapt on how language is used in the target language. Parallel texts are also a good tool in our classroom before start to translating. And finally, translating first language to second language. Considerations while translating from first language to second language. Inverse translation has to be adapted to users' need. This is very important to work with our learners. Another aspect that we have to consider is to take in account textual features. Analyze process, progress, and particular difficulties together. So the teacher maybe here in this step identifies the difficulties and work with our learners in class. Make 3 attempts before the final version when we are translating a text. And the students prepare is for the future, they later become confident with the tools and their beliefs. According to all the analysis in this slide, in this presentation, I agree, and I am not at all convinced, like the programs says that just communicative part have to be taught in the classroom. I consider that translation is a good tool, as I mentioned in my reflection in one of my tasks in this subject. I consider that it is some aspect that has to take in account, because it develops notice, it raising awarenesses, and it helps our learners to notice how the target language is used in English. For me, it's a very good tool. I sometimes use it, and I am sure that if we balance and combine some teaching methods, we can be or have successful classes in our classroom. Thank you very much. And the sources I consider is the anthology from the university and the class presentation that the teacher Castañón Aquino, Jesus Adrián, sent us to our tasks. Thank you.